Dershowitz made that point. That was the beginning of dividing America, and now we are more divided. Here's Geraldo.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Geraldo Rivera, sitting in for Chris Cuomo. Tonight, as you have undoubtedly heard, one of America's most notorious public figures, the former football player, movie star, and acquitted slasher killer O.J. Simpson is dead. And while I usually make it a point not to speak ill of the dead, Simpson does not deserve that mercy. In my opinion, based on the evidence I have seen, he was an enraged, obsessively jealous, double murderer who hid his rage behind a mask of affability. He exploited our nation's racial divide to avoid responsibility for the brutal slasher killings that he perpetrated on Nicole Brown Simpson, his ex-wife and mother of their two children, and her friend Ronald Goldman. O.J. nearly cut their heads off, then left town, only to skulk back via the infamous white Bronco slow-speed 405 freeway car chase. The odyssey ending eventually in a downtown Los Angeles courtroom in the hands of a nearly all-black jury. When the killer's gloves did not fit, he was acquitted after the most sensational televised criminal trial in history. The diametrically opposed reaction in real time of the elated black community and the outraged white community to the verdict spoke more potently about America's racial divide than any thoughtful essay ever could. Now, before we get into it with some great guests tonight on Cuomo, some context. Race matters in criminal justice. In this case, relations between the largely white police force and the black community in L.A. at the time could not have been worse. Just 3 years before, in 1992, 4 white cops had been acquitted by a suburban white jury in a barbaric roadside beating of a man named Rodney King. Arrested for drunk driving, a videotape graphically showed Rodney King being beaten within an inch of his life by the cops. And yet the white suburban jury acquitted the white cops. Despite powerful evidence of their brutality, the white cops walked. Rage ensued. L.A. burned. The 1992 Rodney King riots were among the worst in American history. 50 dead, 2,300 injured, and $1 billion in damages. 3 years later, when O.J. Simpson went on trial before that downtown black L.A. jury, in my opinion, virtually no amount of evidence would have been enough. Add to that Simpson's dream team eliciting powerful testimony of racist statements by white cops like Mark Furman, who apparently made a habit of using the N-word. Cops did that in the 1990s. In my opinion, even a videotape, though, of the murders themselves would not have been enough to convict O.J. Simpson. Now he's dead, at 76 years old, of prostate cancer. Condolences, of course, to his children. And, of course, may the memories of Nicole and Ron be a blessing. You know, it's interesting that O.J. Simpson, after his acquittal, had some choice words for yours truly. Let's go back in time to O.J., recently acquitted of the awful double homicide. Here he is.
I can only give you an impression of Mr. Rivera that I had even before my whole ordeal, is that some people on this earth, I mean, ecologically speaking, you know, we have buzzards, we have jackals, and they must serve a purpose, because what they do is they feast on misery and death. Long before my case, this man feasted on people's misery and death. Just look at his shows.
Sometimes you can judge a man by the character of his enemies. He is who he is. I am who I am. So Mark Garagos and Tavis Smiley join us. They are wonderful guests. I want to bring Tavis. Not only covered the trial, but he talks every day about race in America. Mark Garagos, of course, an ace attorney. Tavis, it was a pleasure doing your radio show today, and it seemed to me that your guests were almost angry at me for stereotyping them. Your black guests, the callers. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing that. It's just that I think people are a function of their shared experiences. But before you get to Mark Tavis, you tell me, what was that all about today?
Well, first of all, it's good to be on the program with you. Thank you for the invitation, Geraldo. Dr. King once famously said, there's some evil in the best of us and some good in the worst of us. I put it this way, that some of us is not the sum of us. The S-O-M-E of us is not the S-U-M of us. And I kind of chuckled when you called him a slasher and went in so hard and then all of a sudden wanted to pivot and offer condolences to his children. I'm still trying to square those two things. I digress on that for the moment. Having said that, what's important, I think, to note all these years later is that black juries convict people every single day. I didn't like the maligning of black people writ large then. I will not stand for it now. Black folk not only convict folk every single day in this country, Geraldo, as you well know, black people are for better and for worse, we are the most forgiving people in the country. Think about Mother Emanuel. Think about the shooting in Buffalo. What happens when white folk maim, harm, and murder black people? So often, we come out before they've ever even asked for forgiveness, if they ever do, and say, born of our Christology, that we forgive you. So we don't just convict, we're the most forgiving folk in the country, and there are lessons, I think, that the broader community ought to learn from black folk and not malign them 30 years later for the reaction
Tavis,
that many of us had 30 years ago.
I agree with that. I'm not maligning anybody. How do you then, to use your verb, to square, how do you square the profoundly different reactions by white people and black people to the verdict? White people
square it this way.
Depressed and saying, oh, woe is us. Black people saying, yes, hooray, we win one for a change. What was that all about, Tavis?
Two or three things right quick. Number one, you and I are both media veterans, you more so than I. But we've been at this game for a long time. This ain't our first rodeo. We know that the media focuses on the story that it wants to tell. I can assure you, there are white folk, I talked to some today, who think that O.J. didn't commit these murders, and there are black folk who know that he did. And so, again, the media focuses and fixates on these images to advance the narrative of a divided America that they want to advance, number one. But as you well know, most of white America made up its mind before the verdict ever came in, before all the evidence was presented in that trial. You could see the polling and the tracking every day as to how many white folk felt about O.J.'s innocence or guilt before we got to the end. I'll say this very quickly, and you'll remember this. I was on your program almost every night for the entirety of this trial. I'm the only guest, the only contributor you had.
Proud to have you.
Well, I was honored to be there. I thank you for the opportunity. You made my career. So if you love me, thank Geraldo. If you loathe me, blame Geraldo. Having said that, I was the only guest you had, the only contributor you had that entire time, who never went on the air to say what he thought about the verdict, what he thought about the guilt or innocence of O.J. Simpson. I covered the trial. I never told you my opinion until the trial was over. And when the verdict came in, you asked me, Tavis, you must please tell me now what you think of the case. And I said to you and all of America, I believe that LAPD framed a guilty man. Think about that. So not everybody black celebrated O.J.'s acquittal.
Mark Garagos, Tavis, thanks for that. So the LAPD framed a guilty man. Mark, I heard Dershowitz earlier, Alan Dershowitz, a member of the Dream Team, suggesting that they provided ample reason for a jury to acquit, including blood splatter and a sock that was soaked in blood this way or that way. Come on, would a videotape have made the difference in this case? You tell me, given the climate post-Rodney King, given the tensions, given the relationship between the black community, given the underdog status that O.J. Simpson was anointed, would any evidence have sufficed, Mark Garagos?
Well, I don't know about any evidence, but, you know, and by the way, Geraldo, I'm having a flashback back to the days when you were on CNBC during this time, and we used to do the show together. So I'm having it's really an out-of-body experience. But remember, both juries, in my opinion, got it right. You're talking about a criminal jury that heard the lead detective using indefensible language, lying about it, subsequently being convicted of perjury. You're talking about DNA evidence that didn't quite make sense. And you're talking about a subsequent civil case where O.J. could not invoke the Fifth, and was found liable at a lesser standard. I would venture to say that any, whether white, black, green, or whatever, any defendant who was on trial, who had the lead detective basically thoroughly impeached to the point where he was criminally prosecuted for perjury in a murder case, why would you expect anything else but a not guilty? So I've always been perplexed by that. I will give you, though, that the way you have described what was happening in Los Angeles was true, but you have to lay over also, this also was a function of a DA's office that was in turmoil at the time. This was a DA's office that couldn't win the big one. And subsequent to that, and subsequent to this verdict, the not guilty, 8 days later was the Menendez case, with jury selection then, and a completely different trial number 2 than trial number 1. There were a lot of cross currents going on in Los Angeles that the national media wasn't reporting on at the time.
Do they still exist, Mark?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. LA has, even to this day, with the current DA, you've got kind of that internecine warfare that's going on in the DA's office. You've got an election with George Gascon, who has become kind of a lightning rod. You have there were his own deputy DAs are fragging him, so to speak. And you're going to see an election going into November that I think is going to be equally contentious. We basically are reliving the 90s once again in Los Angeles. And I think that O.J.'s death today points that out and actually brings back not only memories of your old show, but that age.
So, Tavis, I have a clip here from one of the jurors that I think really makes my point about race matters. Mm-hmm. Here, roll that.
Jeanette Harris, what do you think now? With what you know now, as opposed to what you knew then, do you think it's possible he was involved, Mr. Simpson?
I have no idea. And, when I was a juror on the trial, he wasn't on trial for being involved or being aware or knowing. He was on trial for, did he murder those 2 people? The prosecution did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it.
Tavis, do you think that any evidence would have been sufficient for that lady, the woman who was on the jury, that it was not beyond a reasonable doubt? It was beyond almost all doubt, beyond reasonable doubt, in my view. And would any amount of evidence have sufficed to make up that lady's mind in the other direction, Tavis?
I think 3 things. You got to be very careful, Geraldo. You're on a slippery slope, because I know you as a humanist, and I know and I hope you don't intend to suggest this, but you're getting awfully close to suggesting that black people don't have the capacity to sit on juries, to listen to evidence, and to make informed decisions.
I don't mean that. I don't mean that at all. But unlike most people, I'm not afraid to confront the issue. This was a real issue.
My point is simply this: that black people sit on juries every day in this country, listen to the evidence, they make informed decisions, and they convict, number 1. Number 2, racism is still the most intractable issue in this country. Number 3, black people did not invent tribalism. And number 4, while America has grown older and we've grown wiser, we haven't grown up. We are still so immature when it comes to having real, transparent conversations about race in this country. And so you can't expect that race automatically disappears in a criminal justice system that's rotten from the bottom all the way up. That's my point.
I agree with everything you said. Let me ask you this. Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, goes on trial in New York if things stick to schedule in a couple of weeks. Do you think Donald Trump can get a fair trial in a borough that is mostly black and brown?
Absolutely. I think the jurors in that case are going to look at the evidence that will be presented by Alvin Bragg, the DA. We're looking at all the evidence that's already coming out as it is. I think those jurors will look at the case and they will decide whether or not Mr. Trump is guilty. Now, one could argue, and you argued pretty forcefully today, and it made me think that Alvin Bragg, the DA in Manhattan, may have overcharged in this case. but they will look at the evidence, and I think they can obviously come to a decision that Mr. Trump is guilty or innocent. But with all these charges and all these allegations, I believe that the American people can, in fact, look at what's in front of them and come to a fair, honest decision.
Mark Garagos, the same question. Do you think Donald Trump can get a fair trial in Manhattan?
No, he can't get a fair trial in Manhattan. And, I don't think it matters so much the ethnicity, race, whatever you want to, about the demographics. There is something that trumps, pun intended, all of that, and that's the kind of the tribalism that you talked about. And you can't, first of all, when you take a look at the idea that somehow that black Americans can't convict. I mean, as somebody who's tried, I stopped counting over 300 jury trials. It's just false. I mean, sometimes the worst juror for you can be a African American juror if you're on the defense side. Remember,
one thing. I think, Tavis, you were very unkind to me with that slippery slope stuff. That's not me. I'm the former lawyer for the Young Lords. I know the score in the streets in a very sincere, straightforward, lived life
hey, Geraldo,
way. I just know that O.J. Simpson was guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. It's not about how blood dried on a sock or anything like that. What about the flight? What about the fact that he got jumped on a plane to go to Chicago? What about the Bronco chase?
Yeah. You are my friend. Sorry. You are my friend, Geraldo. You are my brother of many years. I said earlier in this program that you are the first person to put me on national television. You helped build my career. For that, I am forever grateful. I did not accuse you of anything. I just said we're getting awfully close to suggesting that black folk cannot be fair and impartial juries. I just don't buy that, my friend. That's all.
No, I just think that in the wake of Rodney King, in the dysfunction that Mark describes in the DA's office and in the relations between that office and the community and the cops, which we haven't even started talking about, the cops yet, a conviction was nigh on impossible in the Simpson case. Simpson became the home team to those jurors, in my opinion. Now, I think it's constitutionally protected. It may offend some people. You know, that was 30 years ago, and I'm still on TV. So I must see something. But anyway, I love you, Tavis.
I just don't want this narrative.
You are one of the greats, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If Donald Trump is convicted, I don't want the narrative to be that black people did him in, man. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough. I think that would be a great show, but believe me, if you don't think he's thinking about, finding the black guy who's going to give him a ticket to ride, you don't know Donald Trump the way I do. Yeah. Mark, thank you. Brilliant lawyer, and I always appreciate it. And we had some times. Coming up next, the O.J. Simpson trial made an already tense relationship between cops and the black community only worse, mainly due to the racist rantings of one rogue cop named Mark Furman. We'll play you his testimony from the trial. Plus, did O.J. Simpson confess to the killings? My next guest says he did, and she's got it on tape next.
O.J. Simpson in a knit cap from 2 blocks away is still O.J. Simpson. It's no disguise. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Geraldo Rivera, filling in for my friend Chris Cuomo tonight. When O.J. Simpson was acquitted in 1995 of the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman, who was a waiter at the restaurant she had just had dinner, who was returning her, I think it was her eyeglasses or sunglasses. He was make the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a horrible, horrible coincidence. O.J. killed them both. But since then, relations between the largely white LAPD and LA's black community could not have been worse. And the LAPD detective on the O.J. case, Mark Furman, was cast as a racist who planted evidence. Now, Take a look at him being cross-examined by O.J.'s lawyers.
Do you use the word in describing people?
No, sir.
Have you used that word in the past 10 years?
Not that I recall, no.
I only have one other question.
What was that, Mr.
Detective Furman, did you plant or manufacture any evidence in this case?
I assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
So how has policing changed since the trial of the century? Another dear friend, they're all pals of mine. It's like a big reunion. Former NYPD homicide detective Bo Dietl covered the O.J. case and trial extensively in Los Angeles. And Bo joins me now. Welcome, buddy. So what was your reaction when you heard that O.J. had passed?
Well, I just felt as though finally the story's closed. And, you know, when that gentleman was talking about you, they don't know. I go back to you at Young Lord's days, and anybody could call you anything different. You're one of the most fairest persons I've ever met in my life, Geraldo. I don't like when people take your credibility and do something with that. Now, as far as this case goes, I retired as a homicide detective. I investigate homicides now.
I appreciate that.
There was more evidence in this case than I've ever seen in any kind of murder case from the blood. And one of the things with the Bruno Maglia shoes in the blood, remember they were in the pool of blood? And he said, I never had a pair of Bruno Maglia shoes. My friend, Al Tomatas, bought the shoes for him. Then they showed him on the sidelines of an NFL game with the Bruno Maglia shoes. Every aspect, the blood being sprinkled around. I guess this was they must have went to a blood bank there, got the blood sprinkled around. Now, as far as Furman goes, you know, when that was used, where he said he never used the N-word before, I mean, I don't know what he's thinking there, but that shouldn't have been the preponderance of evidence to acquit anybody. Remember Rampart in the LAPD? They had the Rampart division that was so corrupt in L.A., and the people, they were robbing people, they were beating people up, they were killing people. So this was still in the atmosphere in 1994. And as far as this case goes, you're exactly right. If we had a video of him stabbing this poor young man, this beautiful lady, he still would have gotten convicted. And I don't really believe there was nothing that they could have done more than they did. It was a great case. They had a lot of evidence, but the reality was, now I was on one of the shows. I took a glove that fit me pretty good, and I hold it up. When you spread your fingers, you couldn't pull the damn glove down. And I'm showing on the TV, you could do this. That was the most ridiculous thing that that prosecutor ever did. But they were all looking for an out. The out was Furman. The out was that they set this whole thing up. Let's be real about this whole thing. This had more evidence. My friend Stevie Wonder, who I know and I love, and he's blind, he could have convicted O.J. on these murders.
What do you think of the relationship between cops and the black community generally? L.A. at the time, and you were there reporting it. New York now. What do you see in both?
Well, I think the black community, and I stand up, I'm right now having dinner next door with the police commissioner, Eddie Caban, and the chief of detectives. As we speak now, I left my dinner table. The reality is, I really believe the black community in New York City and all these cities around the country are sick and tired of the crime element that's out there. They are the victims, the same as the white people. So in reality is you just can't talk about hope. You've got to do something. And when you get criminal migrants, I'm not saying migrants, criminal migrants that we don't know who they are, and they're being released for assault. This poor lady was going to church. They threw her down the stairs. She has a fractured skull. Good news, I just heard the chief of detectives tell me they locked the kid up. You know how old he is? 16 years old. You know what's going to happen? He'll be out before we finish this newscast right now. My point is, crime is crime against black, white, or whatever it is. And my last case, you know, was the Palm Sunday massacre. 10 dead, 8 children under the age of 8 years old. 10 dead. I prosecuted him. I testified. He's out. They're all out. The non-rapists are out. Everybody, every cop killer in New York is out. Where do we draw the line? Now we have illegal criminal immigrants that are committing crimes. We don't even know who they are. When do we stop? It's not a black and white issue. I love the community of New York. It's a melting pot. My family came from Sicily and Germany. New York is a beautiful place, but the reality is it's not a division, black, white. It's criminal. against good people. Let's stop the bull crap. Not hope. We got to deal with it right now, Geraldo.
I hear you, Bo. Please give my regards to Commissioner Caban, the first Latino police commissioner in NYPD history. And Bo, former hero cop, or I guess once a hero cop, always a hero cop. And I know, Bo, you were at the wake for Jonathan Diller, the cop who was tragically murdered. It was awful. And you heard with your own ears the feedback that the governor, I don't have time for you to respond to it, but I know that it moved you deeply when those cops responded to the governor.
My heart goes out to that officer that was killed. And you want to know something? The only facts are that are there. These are people that are committing crimes over and over. When you have the head of the assembly says incarceration is not a deterrent for crime, that's ridiculous. He's an idiot. The head of the Speaker of the New York State said is an idiot for making a statement. It's not a deterrent. Putting people, when you keep committing crimes, what do you do?
I agree.
A dog keeps biting you.
I support deterrence, right? But I also have to honor the clock. So thank you very much. Regards to the commissioner. I have to move on to our next guest, another old friend. In 2006, then a publisher, Judith Reagan, secured the rights to the extremely controversial book, If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer. It was a hypothetical account of how O.J. would have murdered Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman if he did it. The rollout was a disaster. After massive backlash to the book and her primetime interview with O.J., the book and the interview were canceled. The book was eventually published with a foreword by the Goldman family. It took 11 years for the interview to get broadcast. Here, watch.
As things got heated, I just remember Nicole fell and hurt herself. And this guy kind of got into a karate thing. And I said, well, you think you can kick my ass? And I remember I grabbed a knife. I do remember that portion, taking a knife from Charlie. And to be honest, after that, I don't remember.
You wrote in the book, I had never seen so much blood in my life.
Yes.
You're covered, the scene. Can you describe it?
It's hard for me to describe it, I'm telling you. I don't think any two people could be murdered the way they were without everybody being covered in blood.
Judith Reagan joins me now. So what was that about, Judith? Is that a confession by O.J.?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think I interviewed him for 5 hours on that day, and anyone who has watched that interview has said to me, it's absolutely his confession. There is no other way to describe it. And it's also the profile of a textbook abuser. He blames Nicole for everything. It's her fault for ruining his life. He laughs inappropriately. He has not a speck of remorse, zero empathy for the victims, and no understanding at all of his actions. None. And it was bone chilling to sit there across from him for 5 hours because he was truly cold-blooded, deeply manipulative, and it was a very disturbing 5 hours. He also, halfway through the interview when we took a break, leaned over to me and said to me, and it was the first time I had ever spoken to him or met him when I walked into that room. He said to me, when you came here today, you didn't think you'd like me, but I changed your mind, didn't I?
So that's an egotist, a narcissist, but is it a murderer? And you, as you sit there tonight, Judith, believe that he is the perpetrator of this brutal crime.
There is no question. There is no question. When it was announced that I interviewed him and there was that public outcry, Christopher Darden was very upset and said the interview shouldn't be shown, and that's terrible. Christopher Darden was one of the prosecutors. I also published his book, and we were friends, but he did speak against me at that time. When he saw the interview for the first time, he apologized to me, and he said, I wish this had aired in 2006 when you did the interview, because it's absolutely a confession. Everyone said that. So
were you suitably chagrined when he went on to be a very popular figure. He did the 9 years for the crime of rinky-dink burglary in Las Vegas that had nothing to do with the murders that he committed. And I agree with you that he is exactly speaking the truth, except in the premise that he gave you, aren't there other people involved that he's a witness to the crime, or he comes on the crime shortly after it happened, but of course it was not him. So was he trying to have it both ways, trying to be provocative and still profess his innocence despite his shady kind of background?
Well, in the interview that I did with him, he said that he was there. He said that he brought a knife. And he said he went there with someone by the name of Charlie, someone he called Charlie. He did not say that that was his real name, but that was the name he was using. And he said that Ron Goldman showed up and he confronted him and he went into some kind of karate stance and he killed him in cold blood. He did say that. He confesses to that in the interview. So he didn't say in the interview that I did with him that he wasn't there or he was the second banana. He went there, he claimed, with the intent to terrorize her. And the way he described it to me, as if it's perfectly normal to show up with a knife at someone's house to terrorize them. And he actually told me that he used to go to her house. Now, remember, this is after they were divorced. He would go to her house, look through the window, and terrorize her. And I imagine regularly, and to this day it disturbs me, his poor children who were in that house. Sydney and her brother Justin, who were in the house that night, no one talks about what they possibly heard, what they were subjected to. They were victims of this crime in a really, really horrifying and tragic way. And this is a man who, as a perpetrator of domestic violence, had a long history of assaulting Nicole, of terrorizing her. And even though he said in that confession that he went there to terrorize her and things got out of control, this was a man who had not one speck of remorse, not one speck of empathy, not one speck of care for the pain that he caused, the suffering that he caused, and the 2 murders that he committed.
Judith Reagan, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on. I think very important information. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, we're going to take you folks inside the O.J. Simpson courtroom with a reporter who got unprecedented access after this.
911 emergency.
Can you get someone over here now to 325 Gretna Green? He's back. Please.
Okay, what does he look like?
He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. Could you just send somebody over here?
Okay, what is he doing there?
He just drove up again. He just drove over.
Okay, wait a minute. What kind of car is he in?
He's in a white Bronco. But first of all, he broke the back door down to get in.
Okay, wait a minute. What's your name?
Nicole Simpson.
Okay, is he the sportscaster or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Wait a minute. We're sending the police. What is he doing? Is he threatening you?
I'm going nuts.
Who said that last June 13th, 1994 was the worst nightmare of his life. This, referencing today's verdict, was the second.
That was Jim Moret, one of the most recognizable faces from the coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial. Moret, a lawyer, now chief correspondent on Inside Edition. He covered the O.J. Simpson trial every day on CNN, which was then the only 24-hour news network. He got some unprecedented access. Jim, welcome. You even got a ride on the Bronco.
I did. Years later, of course, and I followed you all the time to stay up to date because I felt this insatiable need, frankly, to know everything that was going on and all of the perceptions. And, Geraldo, I just want to point out, we talk a lot about O.J. today. That interview you did with Judith Reagan was chilling, and it reminds us why we were covering this in the first place. There was a horrific slaying of 2 people. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, and their families must feel justice denied, and they never got an admission from O.J. Simpson. They never got the justice they feel they deserved. I just wanted to put that out there.
And they never got a dime from the civil verdict in the trial that almost immediately followed the criminal acquittal, and he was found civilly liable. I think it was in the $30 million range. Now with interest must be At the time of his death today, probably 100 million. So there was no justice. Actually, Jim, just give me a second. I want to just read from the Goldman family statement. The news on Ron's killer passing away is a mixed bag of complicated emotions and reminds us that the journey through grief is not linear. For 3 decades, we tirelessly pursued justice for Ron and Nicole, and despite a civil judgment and his confession in If I Did It, the hope for true accountability has ended, which is really too bad. But this was one of those shared experiences, almost like a negative eclipse. Everybody was fascinated. Everybody was watching. It was like Super Bowl ratings. Tell us how you experienced. Aside from the fact that now you and I, going back 30 years, we can watch how we've responded physically to the passing of the decades.
Exactly.
What's your when you think about this epic event? Jim? What's your takeaway?
It was a shared experience, as you mentioned. It became a national obsession, and I've always looked at this as a turning point for America, ushering in this era of reality television. We at CNN, I was at CNN at the time, Core TV and CNN showed this gavel to gavel. There was no Fox, there was no MSNBC at the time. So if you wanted to watch this trial live, many local stations carried it, but certainly from a national level, you had 2 places to go. And people were obsessed. And it had Hollywood, it had sex, it had money, it had race, it had all of the elements that people were craving. And to be quite honest with you, people weren't watching soap operas at this time. This became the national soap opera. And for 9 months, Geraldo, during this trial, people were looking at every moment, and you couldn't go anywhere. I'm sure you experienced this as well. Every time I went out, people had something to say about the trial. They had a question. They had a theory. Everybody had a point of view. And I don't think that you have that nowadays. First of all, there was no social media. There was no internet. So this was it. And 90 million, 95 million people saw that chase, and 150 million saw the verdict. You don't have that type of shared experience anymore today.
When we talk about the verdict, it becomes, the event, the death, and, there go all of us eventually. But that the verdict, how the different responses and so forth, did America ever heal racially from that? Or do you think that in a way the true legacy of O.J. Simpson is the fact that he and his lawyers spotted the racial divide in this country and they ran a train through it? What do you think, Jim?
Well, you look at 25 years later, you had the George Floyd case, and I think that you saw the racial divide is still there. The perception of how the police deal with groups of people and how some people perceive justice one way and others a wholly different way. Our experience is very different. And I think that it's a bad time in American history when you look at that O.J. Simpson case. It came just a couple of years after the Rodney King beating in Los Angeles, and I think that L.A. was a powder keg, and it was ready for some retribution, for some payback. So when you had the not guilty verdict, you had a group justifiably happy that this was payback, this was karma. And then you had another group saying, did you see the same thing that I saw? Now, you listen to Judith Reagan's her interview with you, and when we hear what O.J. said to her, and she reminds us very specifically about the domestic violence allegations and actually a no contest plea that O.J. made, saying he did it. He did beat his wife, and there were no repercussions, and there was no payment at that time. And look what happened. It escalated. I think that it's hard to believe it's 30 years later, and in many ways, I don't know that much has changed.
Jim Moret, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, coming up next, Kato Kalin. Remember him, OJ's live-in house guest, who nobody could ever forget. He became a central figure in the trial. Ashley Banfield actually has an exclusive interview with my old pal, Kato Kalin. Ashley joins me right after this. NewsNation's Ashley Banfield has an exclusive interview tonight with the most famous house guest in the world, Kato Kalin. She joins us right now. Ashley, thank you very much. Does he still have that impish charm, Ashley?
He does. But you know what, Geraldo? I think that he has really come to terms with everything that's happened in his life and what his life became because of the OJ trial. I think if you saw this incredible clip that he put out on Twitter today, he very graciously reached out to the children of OJ. They had no dog in that fight. They had nothing to do with this. And then, of course, the Goldman and the Brown families and wished them all peace. And I just think it was really big of him to do that. He's going to be my guest at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock. And I'll tell you what, he is a very kind-hearted soul, maybe very different than we all remember him back in the 90s.
What do you think about the Tavis Smiley's slippery slope, fighting back against the danger of stereotyping on racial basis? What do you make of that, Ashley?
I love Tavis. Love him. He's wrong, especially on this case. I think you and I well remember ESPN just came out a couple of years ago with an interview of one of the jurors who said 90% of us wanted payback. We knew that he was guilty, but we wanted payback for Rodney King. She admitted it. She said the quiet part out loud. So I don't think it's fair in the criticism of this particular case and that jury and that verdict to say that there's a slippery slope to saying that African Americans can't be good jurors. African Americans are great jurors. Just those 90% admitted that they wanted payback. That's not right. That's not justice.
I think that to not talk about Rodney King and the riots and the devastation and the I could call it tribalism if you want. I remember the people who were savaged, most brutally were the Koreans downtown. It's a reality. Race matters in criminal law, in criminal justice, does it not, Ashley?
It did. It certainly did in this case. And I think also, Geraldo, over the last 29 years, we have also seen that if you poll African Americans who were firmly behind the verdict of not guilty back in 1995, that has assuaged. And it is no longer that sort of conviction anymore. Many would say, I think I was wrong. I was part of a movement. I don't believe that anymore.
Ashley, thank you. I'll see you later this evening. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
Looking forward to it.
I say goodnight. I want to thank